Good morning. Again, we want to welcome our panelists that I'll introduce shortly, and certainly everyone who's taken the time this morning to call in or to participate in this morning's Zoom. In terms of, by the way, my name is Rocky Moretti. Moretti is spelled Moretti, and I'm the Director of Policy and Research with TRIP. TRIP is a nonprofit organization based in Washington, D.C. We've been putting out reports for over 50 years at the state, local, and national level, and we're supported by a coalition of organizations involved in a variety of facets in terms of providing and maintaining the nation's transportation system. Our format today is I'll give my comments. We will then hear comments from speakers that are also participating in this call, and then we'll take questions. You can indicate on the chat system or the raise your hand that you would like to ask a question. My colleague Carolyn Kelly will moderate that portion of the event, and if you have a question, you'll be elevated to panelist status so that we can interact with you and answer any questions you might have. It's a new report is called Moving South Carolina Forward, and it very much is looking at where is the state now? Is it able to move forward in terms of providing an efficient, safe, and reliable transportation system that a growing state like South Carolina needs to support its economic and quality of life aspirations? It's based on data that we've collected from the South Carolina Department of Transportation, the Federal Highway Administration, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, and also the Bureau of Transportation Statistics. Now, let's take a look at some of the key findings. One of the key findings is that transportation is back in South Carolina. We saw that during the height of the pandemic last April, the vehicle travel in South Carolina had dropped 37% below normal levels for that time of year. And what we saw in the latest data, which comes from June of 2021, that vehicle travel in South Carolina was actually 4% higher than in June 2019, the most recent pre-pandemic June. So travel's back, and as you would anticipate, that means that we're seeing traffic congestion levels returning to pre-pandemic levels across the state. And fortunately, in addressing this demand for maintaining the system that's getting increasingly more travel, in 2017, the South Carolina legislature approved Act 40, which has allowed a 72% increase in the state's investment in its roads, highways, and bridges. And the ongoing deliberations in Washington over a potential $1 trillion infrastructure package, which would also include the reauthorization of the current surface transportation program that expires at the end of this month, is another significant possibility for an additional boost in funding in the state. And that's critical, but because currently, even with the additional funding, the South Carolina Department of Transportation finds that it still has a $403 million annual shortfall in the amount that's needed to maintain the state's roads and bridges, improve the safety of the system, and also to continue to address reliability and traffic congestion on the system. The report points out that from 2015 to 2019, that there were 5,018 traffic fatalities in South Carolina, approximately 1,000 people a year. Clearly a number that's far too high. In fact, the report points out that the traffic fatality rate in South Carolina is the highest in the nation. This is an apples to apples comparison looking at traffic fatalities per 100 million miles of travel. And unfortunately, South Carolina, notwithstanding continued efforts to improve the safety of the system, have the highest traffic fatality rates overall, and also on its rural non-interstate roads, where the traffic fatality rate in South Carolina is approximately 3.5 times higher than on all other portions of the state's roadways. It's estimated that when we look at traffic safety, that roadway safety is a function of the drivers, the vehicles, and the roadways. And we know that we need to make improvements in all those areas, including enforcement and education. But clearly, when you do a variety of improvements, such as adding rumble strips, paving shoulders, providing roundabouts, adding left turn lanes where it's appropriate, improving median barriers, we see a significant improvement in roadway safety. And fortunately, due to the additional funding from Act 40, the state has been able to move forward with improved safety improvements on 635 miles of its rural interstate system. Clearly, that is going to reap benefits in the future, but again, it does require that the state has adequate resources to make those improvements. We've also took a look at the impact of traffic congestion in South Carolina, and as we point out in the report, travel is back in South Carolina, and we anticipate seeing traffic congestion levels returning to pre-pandemic levels or actually exceeding them. We estimate that the cost of traffic congestion in South Carolina annually is $2.1 billion a year in the cost of lost time and wasted fuel. In the Charleston area, the report finds that the average motorist is losing an additional $1,165 annually due to traffic congestion as a result of spending 56 hours annually stuck in traffic and wasting 22 gallons of fuel annually. In the Columbia area, the report finds that the region's drivers are losing $842 annually due to traffic congestion as a result of spending an additional 43 hours annually stuck in traffic and wasting 17 gallons of fuel. In the interest of moving along with my presentation, we won't go through all of the urban areas in the state. In the question and answer session, I know reporters that are in other areas. I'll be happy to give the additional data for each region. The trip report also includes a list of the most congested portions of South Carolina's interstate system in the report, including portions of Interstate 26, 85, and 77. And as we point out in the report, South Carolina, largely based on Act 40 funding, has been able to move forward with the widening of approximately 140 miles of the state's interstate system. These projects include the I-85, I-385 Gateway Project, the Carolina Crossroads Project, and also the Low County Corridor. Absolutely vital projects in the state, and certainly the progress made to date has been critical, but the state will continue to need to make further improvements and potentially with additional federal money, hopefully be able to accelerate some of these projects. The trip report also took a look at condition of pavements. Now, this is for roads maintained both by the state government and also local governments, and finds that 18% of major roads in South Carolina are currently in poor condition, and another 25% are in mediocre condition. The trip report finds that in the Charleston area, 16% of major roads are in poor condition and 28% are in mediocre condition. The report finds that in the Columbia area, 11% of major roads are in poor condition and 29% are in mediocre condition. Since 2018, because of the additional money from Act 40, the state has been able to move forward with 4,000 miles of paving projects. Clearly, this is critical in improving the condition of the state-maintained system and keeping that level of effort at the state level and certainly ideally at the local level will be critical in further improving the condition of the system. The trip report also found that 8% of bridges in South Carolina are currently rated structurally deficient or in poor condition, and 48% are rated in fair condition, and those bridges need continued work to make sure they don't slip into poor condition. In the Charleston area, the trip report finds that 7% of bridges are in poor condition and in need of immediate repairs, and 61% are rated in fair condition. The trip report also finds that in the Columbia area, 7% of bridges are rated in poor condition and in need of immediate repair, and another 40% are in fair condition and need ongoing maintenance to keep them from falling into poor condition. We've seen South Carolina Department of Transportation, with the additional funds from Act 40, able to move forward with repairs on 211 of the 465 bridges they've identified since 2018, most in need of significant repairs. But they also point out that based on current funding, they actually anticipate the share of bridges that are in poor condition in the state or restricted carrying lighter weight vehicles are actually going to increase by 81% by 2040, unless additional funding is identified. The report also noted that the transportation system in South Carolina is absolutely vital to the movement of freight in the state. Every year, $465 billion of goods are shipped to or from sites in South Carolina, the majority of them on trucks, and that's anticipated to increase by 65% by 2040. The report includes a list of South Carolina's worst freight bottlenecks, and these include portions of interstates 20, 26, 126, and 526, largely in the Columbia and Charleston area. Again, these bottlenecks have a significant impact on the quality of life, but also the quality of economic growth in the state. As we point out in the report, maintaining and building the transportation system annually employs approximately 50,000 people in the state, and nearly 1 million jobs in South Carolina are in sectors of the economy that are highly reliant on the quality of the transportation system. So it's absolutely vital that we see these investments continue to increase. So in conclusion, before we hear from our next speaker, the funding from the Act 40 legislation in 2017 was a vital step in moving towards South Carolina's transportation improvements in terms of the improvements that are needed in the future. And potentially, in Washington, if the legislatures are able to move forward with an infrastructure package and a long-term reauthorization of the Federal Surface Transportation Program, that will be the critical next step in addressing South Carolina's transportation needs. With that, I'd like to call on Jennifer Patterson. Jennifer is the Executive Director of the South Carolina Alliance for Fix Our Roads. Jennifer?
Good morning, everybody. As Rocky mentioned, I'm Jennifer, and I'm with the South Carolina Alliance to Fix Our Roads, and we are a nonprofit that's focused on advocating and educating on behalf of safe and efficient infrastructure in South Carolina. And we supported passage of Act 40 to help fix roads in 2017, and it's safe to say that these dollars are being put to work. The proof is in the transparency that we've seen when it comes to the revenues, the expenditures, the project list, and most importantly, the work going on across the state. South Carolina is delivering on their 10-year plan, and as the TRIP report points out, the state's making progress to address repairs on our state-owned roads and bridges, and in response to troubling safety statistics, they have implemented targeted programs to address the state's deadliest roads in an effort to reduce accidents and save lives. The legislature's actions in 2017 have put us on a road to repair. However, we still face challenges that Act 40 was not intended to address. Our biggest challenges are driven by our biggest opportunity, which is growth. And while South Carolina does a tremendous job of attracting people and businesses to our state, we're not financially prepared to deal with the increasing demands that is associated with this growth. And so as the TRIP report illustrates, the increase in population and vehicle miles traveled puts even more stress on our roads and bridges, and congestion strains commutes and commerce in many areas in South Carolina. And this is something that's not getting any better, and it's certainly going to get worse if we don't look to address it. You know, and kind of speaking in terms of, you know, loss of time and money, in addition to congestion, as Rocky mentioned, bridges are a key component of our state's infrastructure. And when a bridge is load restricted or closed, it can have significant impacts on the communities and businesses that depend on them. So additional resources are needed to address the needs of our growing state, especially when it comes to congestion and ensuring that we've got proper resources to upgrade and improve the service life of our bridges and routine maintenance. And right now there's two immediate funding opportunities on the horizon that would have profound impacts on South Carolina. And the first is passage of the bipartisan infrastructure plan that's pending in Congress. This would provide for historic levels of investment in physical infrastructure in our state and across the nation. And it also includes regulatory reforms that are aimed at improving project timelines. The second opportunity exists with the use of the one-time money from the American Rescue Plan to accelerate the widening of I-26 between Columbia and Charleston. This is a rare opportunity to essentially buy time on a project of statewide importance and improve a notoriously unreliable and dangerous section of interstate. I mean, when you look at South Carolina, we have a world-class port and third world conditions on segments of the primary interstate route serving it. And so, you know, these one-time monies and this federal funding, I mean, they're not going to resolve all of our problems, but when they're paired with investments at the state and local level, they will help our state get to where it needs to be. And I would just like to thank Rocky and the TRIP team for putting this comprehensive report together. I realize there's a lot of technical data in there, but if there's one resounding theme from this report, it's that our federal, state, and local governments must continue to be proactive about our infrastructure needs, investments, and the sustainability of our funding mechanisms, because maintaining and expanding the nation's fourth largest state-owned system is going to take continual planning and investments. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ronnie Summers with the Palmetto Agribusiness Council to give us his perspective.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. We're grateful to be engaged in this process this morning, this discussion. And, you know, the first question might be, why is agribusiness engaged? We've done an economic impact study that shows that we have an impact of $47 billion annually on our South Carolina economy. We employ 250,000 individuals approximately. And probably more important is we use every road system in the state. I want to emphasize that, all road systems in the state. Early on, prior to the approval of Act 40, agribusiness was out front and supported Act 40. As Jennifer's already mentioned, the primary focus of Act 40 was repairs. And we noted those repairs years before Act 40 was approved. Do we feel like our support was justified? Yes. Do we feel like it's paying dividends? Yes. We're making progress. Albeit, we're playing catch up from years of deferred maintenance. I mean, we kept kicking the can down the road, and now we're playing catch up. But yes, we're making progress. And I want to compliment South Carolina Department of Transportation. They've really got a complex and difficult situation here in South Carolina to deal with, but I feel like they're doing a very good job in relating to what our needs are and trying to get there as quick as they possibly can. Let me speak a little more to agribusiness's use of all the road systems. First, the interstate system, and I'll be brief there because I'm confident my colleague, Mr. Todd from South Carolina Trucking, will talk more to that. But agribusiness uses the interstate system to transport commodities and products to the ports, the inland ports, to the urban areas in the state, throughout the Southeast region, and even national. So the interstate system is extremely important. The biggest single concern is volume, congestion, slow movement of product, and even from an individual standpoint, the slowness of traffic that is created by the volume. And it's already been mentioned several times by Rocky and Jennifer. South Carolina is a growing state, and that will continue. And we want that to continue, and we need to address that growth. More so, though, I want to speak, agribusiness tends to be the voice for rural South Carolina. I want to talk to the state-maintained roads and secondary roads, the so-called farm-to-market roads, if you will. We're dependent on those roads to get from the fields, to get from the timberlands with products, along with other businesses located in rural areas. It's so very, very important that those roads be retained in a good state of repair and improved over time. We have seen significant progress in that regard, but there's still potholes. There's erosion of shoulders on roads, and especially we want to be emphatic about the bridge system in South Carolina. Major concerns relative to restrictions on bridges. What do these issues in rural areas create? They can create safety issues. They create issues relative to equipment maintenance. And I want to tie back into what Jennifer said. That's not as much just economics as it is timing. When farmers need to use roads, they need the roads seasonally. They need them to be open. When folks are harvesting timber, loggers, if you will, they need those roads open. So that's affecting their equipment maintenance. If it's down, they've got repairs, there's an impact. Lastly, economics. Literally the best example is when we have the number of restricted bridges we have, we're finding that our folks hauling grain, hauling logs, hauling poultry, processed goods around the state are having to divert routes 10, 20, 30 miles to get around, which is creating more expense at a time when most businesses are challenged from an expense standpoint. And let me emphasize, these are mostly small businesses operating in rural areas, and we need to support them through good, strong road systems. I guess the emphasis I want to make is we recognize the need for solid road systems in urban areas, but don't forget our rural areas in that process. What's the solution? You know, I don't know the precise solution. I know this, it's going to require funding. It's going to require cooperation from both local, state, and federal representatives. It's going to require extraordinary organizational skills and appropriate manpower to get it accomplished. With that, I want to thank, again, South Carolina Department of Transportation. I think the leadership is organized, they're targeted, they're trying to attack this in the appropriate manner. I think from a manpower standpoint, our vendors and our contractors are prepared here in South Carolina to deal with it, but we need to deal with it sooner, not later. And last, I just want to conclude by thanking South Carolina Fix Our Roads and TRIP for engaging agribusiness in this discussion. And with that, I'll transition to the CEO of South Carolina Trucking Association, Rick Todd. Rick.
Thank you, Ronnie, and Jennifer and the TRIP folks. My name is Rick Todd. I'm president and CEO of the South Carolina Trucking Association. We're really an alliance of businesses that use trucks. And so people refer to the trucking industry as if it's some monolithic entity. It's really not one industry. It's an eclectic mix of industries, including some of Ronnie's constituents and every other sector of the economy that either own their own trucks for their own purposes or use trucking services, or they rely almost exclusively on trucking services for their business or consumers. So really, we like to say that trucking is everybody's business. I'll just not reiterate, but just agree with the comments that have been made by Jennifer and Ronnie. I don't want to repeat them, but I can give you a little bit of a focus on the supply chain and trucking, and in the context of this discussion, what our needs are and how we view them. Trucks, really, if you look at the vehicles out on our highways today and look at the commercial vehicles, about 70% of those are operated 70% of those are operated by Main Street type businesses, small businesses, not the big trucking companies that you would call them, the for-hire truckers. And so combined, those 5% of the total vehicle population haul about 70% of the tonnage moved, probably 90+% of all manufactured goods in South Carolina, and about 80% of the dollar value of everything moved in this country. So they are fundamental to the functioning of an efficient transportation, distribution, and logistics system. They pay about 40% of all highway use taxes, despite making up about 5% of the vehicle population. So they pay their fair share. But we all agree that over time, those user fees are probably going to have to increase to catch up and to continue with not only maintenance, but improvement and expansion of our systems. Every state faces the same challenges we do here. Every state levies user fees, maybe in a slightly different way. It depends on their local economies and their politics and their methodology And every state is in a similar situation as South Carolina in terms of the needs exceed the means. And so Congress has a role to provide the lion's share of the funding for the national highway system. And then the states have to match those funds and also supplement those funds with their own revenues to maintain their own larger state systems. And so it takes a combination of all that to create the type of modern system we need for our growing economy. Trucking is the dominant mode because in order to move freight or provide services, if you're going to do it by rail, you have to have tracks. And as we know, they're very limited. If you want to move freight by water, you got to have a deep water system that's pretty limited. And if you want to fly it, you got to have an airport. So barring those facilities, then trucking has to pick up the slack. And so I have fought kind of a dichotomy my whole career. People don't really like the trucks, but they want their stuff. And so we've got to figure out a way to safely and efficiently accommodate the movement of freight and services by truck. And that's what we spend most of our time advocating for. I'll just touch on what we mean by infrastructure, particularly for trucking. But for all of us really as highway users, whether it's commuting, doing our work, or as consumers, we need to consider that to be competitive, our public infrastructure, again, not only has to be maintained, but it's got to be expanded and modernized. And by modernizing, we need to incorporate expensive, intelligent transportation systems because we were going to have autonomous vehicles coming onto the scene as we move forward. And a lot of times the roadway systems can accommodate that. It's not just vehicle-centric technology. You've got to have, and we need for velocity and safety, better designed interchanges and better and more easily recognized and understood signage. We need larger and safer rest areas. That's for interstate travelers, vacationers, and particularly truckers who have limited hours of service operations and have federally mandated rest periods. And all of this really just increases safety, efficiency, again, velocity of car movement, but also the supply chain. And if our state wants to remain competitive with our sister states and those that we compete with, all of these things have to be taken into consideration, planned and funded. Specifically, just with respect to I-26, as has been discussed briefly, the legislature and the federal government have provided harbor deepening funding. So what we've done is we've dedicated funding for deepening South Carolina's shipping highway, which is the Charleston Harbor. Now they need to do the same for our highway shipping corridor. That is I-26, particularly because it's the most South Carolina-centric interstate in this state. It is one that we all, regardless of where we live, most of us use it on the weekends when we're heading to the coast or to the beach or on vacation. And the trucking industry uses it extensively to connect the port to the upstate and for all of Ronnie's agribusiness industries, whether they're importing or exporting goods, I-26 is critical. And then the arterial routes that feed and service I-26, those need to be considered from a 30,000-foot perspective as well. Congestion across the board impacts trucking, not only from a safety standpoint, which I would say is probably congestion is the truck drivers, the professional truck drivers' biggest safety challenge. When they run up on congestion that they may not be aware of over a hill or something that stops in front of them, or people are jockeying for position, operating in their blind spots, zigging and zagging for position. That really poses a challenge for trucking. And so improvements and expansion of capacity can really improve not only our quality of life, but the safety and operational efficiency of our highway system, particularly the interstates, which are the higher speed routes. I, like my previous presenters, would like to recognize and really congratulate the legislature for biting this bullet back in 2017. It took many years of collaboration between all of the stakeholders, to move public opinion and educate the public, and then educate the legislature and our public policy leaders on the need to address this issue. And now that they have done that and begun that renewal process, they are much more in tune with what needs to be done going forward. And we are encouraging Congress to act on the federal infrastructure bill, and then the state to respond in kind with what they need to do. So thank you for the opportunity to participate, and look forward to the Q&A session.
Thank you. Now, Carolyn Kelly of the TRIP staff can moderate. If any of you have questions, you'll be elevated to panelist status, and you can direct your questions at any of the panelists you choose, or if you want more specific data for your region, if it wasn't part of my initial comments, just let me know and I'll be happy to add those comments as well. Carolyn?
Thanks, Rocky. As Rocky noted, we'll open things up to questions right now. If you have a question that you'd like to address to the panel, you can use either the raise hand function below or submit it via the chat, and we'll elevate you to a panelist, and you can ask your questions directly and any follow-ups as well. I don't see any questions that have come in yet, but in the meantime, while we wait for any questions, I'll just note that the full report that we're releasing today is available on the TRIP website, which is tripnet, tripnet.org. The full report is there, as well as news releases for each region. There's some great infographics there as well. And there's also some short video interviews with Rocky as well for each of the regions that are covered in the report. And there's also the recording of this news conference will be available shortly on our website, so you can also get the recording there as well. So I see a question from Jennifer Roberts. Jennifer, I will elevate you to a panelist, and you'll be able to ask your question. All right, Jennifer, you can go ahead.
You're muted, Jennifer.
There we go.
Sorry about that. Hi, I'm a reporter for WNBF News in Myrtle Beach. I was trying to see if you had some specific data you could talk about right now for this area, Florence and Myrtle Beach.
Sure. Let's start with Myrtle Beach. And
Thank
then
you.
I'll be happy, Jennifer, to also talk about Florence. The TRIP report finds that in the Myrtle Beach area, that the average motorist is losing $745 annually due to traffic congestion as a result of spending an additional 32 hours annually stuck in traffic, and also wasting an extra 12 gallons of fuel annually, again, due to traffic congestion. The TRIP report found that in the Myrtle Beach area, that 24% of major roadways have pavements in poor condition, and another 29% are in mediocre condition. The TRIP report also looked at bridge conditions, and we found that in the Myrtle Beach area, 4% of bridges are rated in poor condition and in need of immediate repair, and 38% are rated in fair condition and in need of ongoing maintenance to avoid falling into poor condition. The TRIP report found that in the Florence area, the average motorist is losing $697 annually due to traffic congestion as a result of spending an additional 30 hours annually stuck in traffic and using an extra 13 gallons of fuel annually due to traffic congestion. The TRIP report found that in the Florence area, 22% of major roadways are in poor condition and 31% are in mediocre condition. So there's some local numbers for Myrtle Beach and Florence.
Thank you so much.
Sure, certainly. Did you?
And I also see a question from Simone Jameson. Simone, I've elevated you to a panelist, so you should be able to ask your question. I believe you're on mute now, but once you unmute yourself, Simone, you can go ahead.
Yeah, not sure what happened there, but good morning, everyone. I'm Simone with Watch Fox in Columbia. I just kind of wanted to speak to, I guess this is a general question for all of you, but have y'all communicated those some of your needs and some of your wants in terms of improvements with even officials local to the Columbia Midlands area, and what have those conversations and feedback been like? And any timeline in terms of or optimism in terms of how soon those changes can be made?
Jennifer, perhaps you could address that from your perspective in South Carolina.
I had a little technical difficulty there. It popped me off and popped me back on. Simone, so since we had a little difficulty there, was it primarily just of addressing the issues that we have kind of talked about in this report with the Columbia officials and kind of what
Yes, exactly. And the local DOT officials to the Midlands area?
We have had ongoing discussions with DOT, as well as, our legislators. I feel, between the leadership and those representing local communities, including here in Columbia, they're very much aware that, what they did was going to, enable some repairs, but there's still more work to be done. And this is obviously a conversation that we look forward to having as things progress here in the state. We're very hopeful that Congress will be able to pass a bill. And when they do, when that money comes to our state, I feel like that's when our conversations are really going to pick up, because South Carolina is going to be required to kind of boost our levels of funding when it comes to meeting that match in order to really get the most bang for the buck and benefit the most from that federal infrastructure package.
Thank you. And I've also got 2 requests just for one more run through of the numbers for the Charleston area. So Rocky, if you could just cover some of those numbers briefly. And I'll also note that the full report does have breakdowns of the road and bridge conditions, the congestion figures, and safety numbers for the 5 major urban areas in the state. So that's for Charleston, Columbia, Florence, the GSA Metro, and for Myrtle Beach. So you can find those breakdowns all in the report for the data. And then Rocky, like I said, if you'll just provide the Charleston numbers, again, we'll get all those.
The trip report finds that the average motorist in the Charleston area is losing $1,165 annually due to traffic congestion as a result of spending an additional 56 hours annually stuck in traffic and wasting an additional 22 gallons of fuel annually due to traffic congestion. The trip report finds that in the Charleston area that 16% of major roadways have pavements in poor condition and 28% are in mediocre condition. The trip report also finds that 7% of bridges in the Charleston area are rated in poor condition and in need of immediate repair, and 61% of the area's bridges are rated in fair condition and in need of ongoing maintenance to ensure they don't fall into poor condition.
Thanks, Rocky. I believe that covers all of the questions that have come in so far. I don't see any additional ones. So one more call for questions. Oh, actually, one moment, please. I see Ashley Hendricks. I see you've got a question, so I'll add you to the panel for a moment, and you'll be able to ask your question. All right, Ashley, if you unmute yourself, you'll be able to go ahead.
Awesome. Good morning. I'm Ashley Hendricks with WBTW News 13 in Myrtle Beach. And just wanted to ask you guys, I know that the SCDOT is aware of the road conditions and are actively, making those repairs. Would you guys say that DOT is moving quickly enough in these efforts? And if not, how soon are we trying to see these improvements take place? You guys have a goal or a timeline in mind?
Jennifer, do you want to address that?
Sure. I mean, actually, I think our DOT is doing a tremendous job with the resources that they've been given. And so our state has been able to implement a 10-year plan. And the good thing about that plan is it sets goals and thresholds for where we, want to be in 10 years. And I think we're almost about halfway through that plan, and we have made significant progress in all areas when you're looking at, pavement conditions and bridges and interstates and the safety projects that have been outlined in that plan to date. And so that's a good thing. But we've also, unfortunately, it's kind of hard for us to articulate to the public just how, things aren't going to happen overnight. And I think that, we've got to remember that the state's in charge of the fourth largest system in the nation, over 41,000 miles of roads and over 8,000 bridges. So, I mean, this is going to take time, but, to date, we are pleased with what we have seen from our DOT. And I think, we are seeing, very much considerable progress being made on our 10-year plan.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ashley. And I see another question from Cameron Bopp. Cameron, I've promoted you to a panelist, so you should be able to ask your question in just a moment here. Okay, Cameron, you can go ahead. I believe you're muted now. There we go.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go right ahead.
All right, Cameron Bott from Live 5 News in Charleston here. I was just wondering if you could speak one more time on some of the interstates and interchanges that are a big focus over the next several months, several years.
When you mean the specifics of some of the projects in your region or sort of the state's approach to improving them?
Exactly, the state's approach overall.
I can start, and then perhaps Jennifer may add a little more light on that. But the department also, if you take a look at some of the information in the report, has put together a very thorough long-range interstate plan, and a lot of that includes addressing some of the major interchanges, and they are systematically moving through those list of projects, and you can see some of the source data from our report to get more information on that. So, as TRIP does around 15 or 20 of these state reports a year, so we really get a look over the shoulder of a lot of departments. And I would say that the South Carolina Department of Transportation, particularly since the Act 40 money in 2017, really gave them additional resources, have identified systematically the interchange and interstate projects that are most needed. Obviously, the hope now is with a federal infrastructure and reauthorization package looming, that if that brings in the type of additional resources that are anticipated, that's going to allow the department, because they have a very good sense of what they need to do next, that this is going to help accelerate some of those projects. Jennifer, do you have anything beyond that you want to add?
I mean, I think you touched on that pretty well, Rocky. And I don't know, Rick, I would give you an opportunity. I don't know if you have anything to add as far as the interstate or interchange components and how.
Sure. Every urban area has a transportation study group, stakeholders. The chats policy committee meets, and they have stakeholder input processes ongoing. As we speak, they're looking at the 26-5-26 project. So they look at that from a 30,000 foot perspective. They've got long range plans. You can go to the website and look at their PowerPoint presentations and see the public input that they've gotten in terms of freight movement, commuting, pedestrian, any kind of transit plans and input. So that is an ongoing process. That's mandated by federal law, but also managed very well by the state DOT. And they take into account what the local officials want as well. So that's something that is continuous. It's always a work in progress. It's only hindered by their ability to deliver on the projects and funding.
Well, thank you. Caroline, are there any additional questions?
I don't see any additional questions.
Okay, I think we'll wrap up for now. I know I'm available the rest of the day if anyone working on a story has any follow-ups. There's contact information on all of our media materials. I want to thank the panelists for taking the time to participate in this morning's call, and for everyone who took the time to also call into our Zoom and listen to our presentation. Again, thanks everyone, and hope you have a great day.
Thanks, Rocky.
Thanks, everyone.